why is it then that you think that in Britain or in some Scandinavian countries where most hospitals are publicly owned, their healthcare outcomes are so much better?
That's a very fair question. I have my own personal opinions of it. Not every healthcare outcome is better. We have a higher cancer survivability rate for certain sort of treatments. We have a higher quality of care for certain people. There are some people that conjecture in the healthcare field it could be because of many different underlying health conditions of how obese America is, where we are more obese than these other comparable countries, also our diet, nutrition. But it's going to be difficult to pinpoint a cause. If your argument is it's because that the government is running it, I reject the argument simply and totally because I know the government runs almost nothing efficiently and correctly. But I guess that's the crux of the argument that you're saying. That you're trying to sell me that in a multivariate analysis, you put all those other things aside. That it's because some guys on government payroll.
I don't put all those things aside. We just went through a detailed argument about why this is a more plausible explanation. Now it's fine to be not convinced by that argument.
Yeah.
But I think describing it as, I'm just dismissing everything else rather than giving you reasons why those explanations make a lot less sense. I mean, what is the biggest difference between the US and Canada? What's the biggest difference between the United States and the United Kingdom? It's not that we're much healthier. All right. Name is Ben Burgis. This is Give Them an Argument. I'm joined, as always, by our super producer, Jake Abbott. And for various reasons, no Kelly or Andy tonight, but we might have them back soon. What you just watched, of course, was a little snippet of what we played in full last week, which was the Charlie-Kirk debate. Which we're gonna stop talking about that soon, but we're gonna talk about it just a little bit more because that was fun. And that is one of the highlights of that for me, which is that Charlie's argument that they don't have better outcomes in those other countries because of nationalized healthcare, because that would mean the government did something well. And it's, I guess, just like an a priori truth that the government never does anything well.
Yeah, exactly. A priori is a good way of putting it, that he's starting with that premise. For him, he's not going to see that point until you perform a proper multivariate analysis. But at the end of the day, it was like a personal belief. He's like, we all have, it's a really great question. We all have personal beliefs of why that's the case, but it wouldn't be appropriate to dig into my heart and reveal my reasoning for why that is the case.
Yeah, right. Like, I mean, that just seems like something that we could actually, reason about. We could look up, like, all right, what are all the things that you think might be relevant? Conservatives love to say it's lifestyle stuff, but I think, I think that's going to be really difficult, like, especially like, even if you could explain, the life expectancy that way, which I don't think you really can. But even if for the sake of argument you could, it's really hard to explain infant mortality that way. Like, babies pretty much have the same lifestyle everywhere. They just kind of lie there and gurgle.
Yeah. He didn't really have an answer to the baby argument, did he?
No, he didn't, because it's also like, okay, the lifestyle stuff that, like, they have the best case on, that, they was it whatever, there's only 30% obesity in Canada and 36% in the US, whatever. That's not obviously relevant to the infant mortality issue. And actually a lot of things that are, like drinking and smoking, that, like, the rates of those things are actually higher, in the UK, which has better health outcomes. And again, it's a little bit more obvious how that would actually tie into the infant mortality issue. It's really going to be hard with mortality amenable to healthcare, which
and also
it's just a general stats nerd way of saying people who die who wouldn't have died if they'd gone to the doctor in time.
Right. And also, I'd be curious with the research on this, but completely divorcing obesity rates and healthcare, I don't know if those are two complete, and his multivariate analysis, I don't know if you could really say that that maybe those aren't connected,
you'd certainly think so.
So I don't know if he can make these isolated points so easily, but as long as we're reminiscing on the debate, which we promise we won't do forever, we'll turn to non-Charlie-Kirk related topics. But I cut what I thought was one of my favorite parts of the debate, which we haven't released as a clip or anything like that, which is when I think you might have blown his mind on your point about bureaucracies and means testing.
So if you don't want bureaucrats to have more power, then the thing that you should really object to, right? Because you said earlier, you think we got to have some kind of social safety net. So we're agreeing that there are some social services programs. We're arguing about how expansive they should be and how they should work. So
generous versus limited.
Sure. Okay, but this is the thing. If you want those bureaucrats to have less power, you don't want limited. That's the last thing that you want. You want generous, and here's why. Here's why.
You're gonna have to convince me on this one.
I know. Like I really liked what you just did there. Like that was some good.
So to restrain their power, you must give them a lot of power.
No, you're not giving them any power. You're taking away their power. It's a really simple argument. Here's how it goes. That means-tested programs give power to bureaucrats. When you say you have to jump through all these hoops to qualify for something, and there's some bureaucrat who gets to decide whether you get it or not,
here's why
bureaucrats have more power. Whereas when you say this is a legal right that every single person has as a citizen, no Canadian is having a bureaucrat decide whether they qualify for healthcare. Or in Finland, you talked about all of the policies that, in Norway that you thought would be an issue for me. Finland
is the poorest
where they have,
country.
Okay, I don't think it's because of this, but in Finland where they don't even have private schools, and certainly you have a right to higher education as a citizen, the way that you have historically in lots of countries, and I think it's worked very well. But when you have that, you don't have students jumping through financial aid, bureaucracy, hurdles, and does this person qualify to get school? Does that person qualify to school? Where bureaucrats have the power to decide what's up, because that's the case where bureaucrats have power over you. If everybody gets something as a right of citizenship, bureaucrats have no power in that circumstance.
But let me ask you something, though. So you want Medicare for all.
Yeah.
Yet HHS is the largest civilian branch of our government. So as we have expanded Medicare, as we have expanded Medicaid, it hasn't been means tested as you want. We have hundreds of thousands of desk workers that are doing the means testing. Are you qualified?
Yeah.
Medicare reimbursements. And so even under your example,
but Medicaid,
it's woefully idealistic. The point is
Medicaid is a means tested.
You cannot have a generous social program without a massive bureaucratic and, dare I say, corrupt administrative state.
Well, I think
Woodrow Wilson would even say that.
Well,
he says, you need the administrative state.
You think I like Woodrow Wilson, the guy who
probably he was a college professor,
and
a college president, so he's kind of in your world.
Well, okay, trust me, neither of those things earn any points for me, but but I think that
that's fair.
Yeah. We all love Woodrow Wilson on the socialist left. Really, no reason to just a little the more you know kind of thing for anybody who's unfamiliar with this history. Woodrow Wilson, A, got the United States into World War I. B, resegregated the federal bureaucracy after it had previously been racially integrated. And C, put Eugene V. Debs in jail for his Canton anti-war speech, as well as just generally going on a frenzy of like red hunting and deporting tons and tons of socialists and communists and anarchists and wobblies, who are like Russian immigrants, for example, back to Russia. So really not our favorite.
Yeah. Funny story, actually. I won an award at my school named after Woodrow Wilson. And in the Facebook group for that award, I saw a lot of college kids now, basically they were like, hey, I know that a lot of you guys want us to change the name of the award. And they want to, take his name down from, I think he attended my school, maybe. I don't know. I went to Hopkins. So I saw, the youth is fighting back when, at the time, none of us thought like, hey, let's Google Woodrow Wilson and see what he was up to. We just kind of went with it, but it was cool to see that there was, some issues there. But Yeah, I thought.
Yeah.
What did you think about his response to your?
Well, it was kind of strange because I think that maybe he couldn't process that literally the claim was that means testing is what leads to all the bureaucracy, because in his response he started talking about Medicaid, having all these bureaucrats who do the means testing. It's like, yeah, dude, that's literally my point here, right? That if you have means testing, then you have to hire all these bureaucrats to do it, and you're, more importantly, you're giving those bureaucrats power because they have the ability to make determinations, like you have to prove yourself to them, and they can decide whether you're in or you're out. Whereas bureaucrats don't have any power over things that everybody just gets, automatically, just as a right of citizenship.
Yeah, his claim here, as a lot of his claims with government power, was rather axiomatic. Just putting forth a claim, and then when you brought up a counter argument, he really didn't have anything. I mean, I thought it was interesting because I hadn't. One of the reasons it was one of my favorite parts of the debate was because I hadn't really thought about the issue that way myself, to be honest. I don't think it would be as popular as you debating Kirk. And maybe there is somewhere, but I'd love to see you debate like a tanky communist on this issue, about how they would like the bureaucracies ideally to be. But as a fellow freedom lover American, I appreciated that point for sure.
Yeah, I mean, this is essentially the same point that Mark Fisher is making in his book Capitalist Realism, about how neoliberalism actually leads to a tremendous increase in bureaucracy, and he's talking about this like open university where he taught in the UK, and that they would sort of put in all these requirements that everybody's basically constantly evaluating everybody and filling out paperwork for all of the evaluations, because nobody has any job security anymore. And again, like, you get the worst of both worlds. You have the precarity, but also much more bureaucracy than you'd have without it, which is yeah. I mean, I think that the tanky thing is interesting. I mean, I guess I sort of did that, but not really directly, about these issues. But you can watch a debate between me and Conrad Hamilton about like kind of how the left should think about China, like last year sometime. And you could also see one that I did with somebody named Esha, who's like a big kind of like Twitter tanky, that was about Noam Chomsky, who is who's and that one was all over the place, but some of it got into, so again, not so much the bureaucracy issue directly, but the sort of like, how should we think about freedom under socialism kinds of issues. Our good friend Yoda 7104 says Ben should moderate a debate between the anarcho-syndicalists and tanky. I would donate meals to that. Yeah, fair enough. That could be fun. I'll probably make that one a patron episode, but but I would do that. Yeah. So yeah, sorry. I am not at my best right now. I got my COVID booster jab yesterday, and so I'm very stiff and low energy and side effecty today.
We'll take that for how powerful and invincible you will be soon.
Yeah. Well, it's like yeah, right. I mean, sure. You go through a day of feeling kind of stiff and groggy, and then you get the like glowing eyes, and you can manipulate magnetic fields and all that stuff. But yeah, I think that yes, exactly, freshly chipped. But no, the important thing is, I'm a day walker now. Like, I can do anything. I'm essentially invincible, or such is my understanding. So. All right. Enough Kirk for now. We actually are going to do a couple little bits of Kirk later in the program, because all of it is specific things that we're going to talk about. But meanwhile, I want to do a couple of other things. One of them, really quickly, is that I want to talk about the Jacobin article before last, because we did not get to this last week because we didn't want to do anything non-debate related for that episode. But let's just do like 90 seconds on it right now. It is actually, I could have done this transition more smoothly, but it is actually very relevant to the bureaucracy issue. So the title is Gavin Newsom Likes Racial Justice as Long as It Doesn't Cost Anything. Fun fact, this is the title that I had on the top of the manuscript that I turned in. I mean, you don't necessarily get to pick the title, but I always put a suggestion in, and the title that I turned in was Gavin Newsom is a piece of shit. But I guess they thought that this was more, that this would be better for whatever reason. But the point of the article is very simple, which is that there was this remarkable confluence of two things that happened literally within days of each other at the beginning of October, or early in October anyway. So one of them was that Gavin Newsom, governor of California, and I go through in the article a lot of quotes from him where he talks about structural racism and we have to tear down and completely reinvent unjust structures. He can be very passionate about this under the right circumstances. He thinks that's the speech you should make. But within a few days of each other, two things happened. One is that Gavin Newsom got like a lot of slow claps from progressives online for signing a bill to require an ethnic studies class for high school graduation in California, which is fine. I mean, to be honest, I'm a little skeptical that high school students learn much from almost anything that they have to take off a graduation requirement, but if one of the things they're going to zone out in is ethnic studies, at least probably what they'll be learning, to the extent that they are paying attention, is better than what they would have been learning otherwise. So I guess that's fine, but it is that is an almost purely symbolic move. Whereas a few days later, much less noticed and much less talked about, because it doesn't get everybody's culture war engines revving the same way, is that a few days later, he vetoed actually, unanimously passed, but he vetoed a piece of legislation coming out of the California legislature that would have dramatically expanded access to financial aid for California's colleges. In particular, it would have extended it to community colleges, because one of the main tools of California's aid system right now, something that's actually called, I shit you not, the middle class grant, and you explicitly cannot use that for community colleges. And it seems like, look, if you care about narrowing racial disparities in various things, which Newsom certainly often claims to care about, and look, I'm very friendly to the sort of critique that people like Adolph Reed or Walter Ben Michaels will make, that when we talk about injustices that disproportionately affect, racial minorities, it's actually a mistake to sort of have the main lens we view that through be racial disparity, because that leads to a politics that's much more about diversifying the top of the economic hierarchy than doing anything for everybody on the bottom. Right. It's like, it seems like if we had exactly demographically appropriate percentages of each group living in poverty, and exactly demographically, correct percentages of each group on corporate boards, I wouldn't really take that as probably as much of a win as Gavin Newsom would. But even put that aside, assume for the sake of argument that we should be disparitarians, that we should be focusing as our sort of the main lens for thinking about injustices that have racially disproportionate effects. We should be thinking about racial disparities. Well, look, ethnic studies is symbolic, but maybe you can learn about the history of racial justice the day you pay attention to class, but actually giving people more money to go to college would in fact chip away at real racial disparities, and especially community colleges are disproportionately non-white, because you have poor students, who often end up going there, and poor students tend disproportionately to be non-white, and so it's a small thing maybe, although it's one that often pisses me off, because I mean, I think, and especially because it would have made it much easier, right? You would have had to jump through fewer bureaucratic hoops to get financial aid in California if this thing had passed. And this pisses me off for a variety of reasons, not least just on a personal level, that, full disclosure, I would not have been able to go to a 4-year college coming out of high school if I had not been able to go to a community college and transfer. And so the thing itself pisses me off, the veto, and it also pisses me off how much sort of left-lib kind of opinion focuses on the first thing and kind of ignores the second thing.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And mini preview for a labor segment, we're going to be talking about similar issues. So that's something to keep percolating today, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, with that, let's get into it.
All right, cool. Well, first, you hit me with some pop quizzes sometimes. Usually they're pretty easy, but I have a tricky one. I'm going to show you a clip and ask what you think this is from.
Okay.
나이 28세, 직업 식당 알바, 채무 1,500만 원. 나이 51세, 직업 방문 요양보호사.
All right, what would you guess that was from?
Friends.
Yeah, exactly right. No, what's pretty wild is I'd heard that the Korean Conference of Trade Unions had set up a general strike / rally, right, about a week back. But that was actually a video that they made promoting the rally directly based on Squid Game. So it's pretty high production values, and those were factory workers or actors playing factory workers talking about why they need to support labor unions. So what we're talking about today, for today's Labor Corner, or whatever we want to call it. We're still waiting on Andy to make the
graphic.
He's that's what he's doing right now. He's fine tuning the graphic to get it to be perfect. We're talking about how at Netflix actually is kind of at the center of two of the biggest labor stories of the past couple of weeks for very different reasons. And I want to get into some of the different wrinkles there, but we're looking at the intersection, right, of class conflict and culture war, right? So in the first case, we see how, Squid Game, actually, the main character, his backstory is based on a real life strike that happened at a South Korean auto factory. And recently in Jacobin, I think you guys should check it out. One of the workers that was actually involved in that strike, which ended in brutal government repression, wrote a piece in Jacobin about what it was like actually being there during the strike, and what he thinks about Squid Game, which is interesting because he talks a lot about how it's so popular in South Korea, and yet is it really going to bring about the changes to that increasingly stratified society that he would like to see. But like I mentioned, there was that huge rally that featured about 16,000 people last week or a little bit before, joining demonstrations around the country, despite a COVID-19 restriction banning a gathering of more than 99 people. Of course, the government condemned it on those terms. And I'm not sure if you all saw it, but a lot of the workers who participated in the action actually dressed up in Squid Game costumes. So it was interesting to see, Netflix, they're only caring about the viewership numbers and how popular the show is, right? But, they could care less if it talks about class conflict, right? But then it's interesting to see, real life workers taking inspiration from Squid Game, and then the actual union, using Squid Game to promote, these issues. So then the other major labor story that's happening at Netflix, which is a bit belabored, no pun intended at this point, is the walkout of transgender folks and allies at Netflix in response to the special. So Ben, we don't want to get too much into this, but you've talked about your opinion a little bit on the walkout so far, right? So do you have like a
I guess sure. I guess the snapshot would just be that I think that if you look at the way the media hyped this up, I think it is very telling, because the initial reports were like thousands of people are going to walk out at Netflix. And then by the time, and major media, we're spreading this claim. And then by the time it actually happened, it's like, well, there are dozens of people at this rally, and it's actually very unclear how many of them are Netflix employees and how many of them are non-Netflix employees to kind of come in and, whatever. There's that clip that everybody always does, there are literally dozens of us, right? Dozens. And the point is not like that it necessarily couldn't be the case that, anybody has a legitimate complaint, although to the extent it's a little unclear what the demand was, and to the extent that some people, wanted like the special removed, I'm very reluctant to, I'm, I tend to be a big free speech guy. I don't like that. But I think the larger point is, and granted, right, part of this is just American, myopia, that like stuff happening in other countries, never mind, labor stuff happening in other countries, is a little bit off of the radar of the American media. But I think it is still pretty telling, right? Because we can obviously, this Korean case, it's nice and dramatic. It actually would be a pretty easy thing, I think, to pitch to an editor that because the Squid Game tie-in, and seems like a nice sort of splashy thing. But 16,000 workers there, or I don't even know, how many workers, went on strike at John Deere?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Yeah,
I think
but
it's nine, isn't it 9 or 10,000? I think. Yeah,
9 or 10,000 sounds about right. So 9 or 10,000 people striking over traditional, basically traditional labor issues. Your sort of wages, benefits, job security, sort of objection to two-tier contracts gets the media much less excited than perhaps as many as dozens, perhaps not really, for just the employees themselves, people who are walking out in ways that tie into some culture war storyline that they've already got, right? They already care about. And I guess the last thing I'd just say about it is that it's very I think this is a tricky thing, because obviously I want everyone everywhere to be unionized. Absolutely. But I also think that in terms of thinking about building a sort of larger working class movement, there is a little bit of an issue, and not specifically here, right? But yeah, exactly. Silver says, what are these other countries you speak of? Yeah, this same kind of thing comes up if you look at some of what the New York Times Guild, was doing last year, for example, or earlier this year. It all blurs together, or some of these other cases that oftentimes we have people in relatively elite kind of media jobs. Their priorities are not necessarily the same as the priorities of most workers, which kind of goes back to that diagram we were looking at with Big and Day a couple weeks ago, with all the different categories of workers, and thinking about how, the sort of tension points and how they relate to each other. But I think this is something that it's going to be very difficult, I don't know. I could be wrong about this. I'm saying it in public, so I'm really opening myself up to somebody in the well actually finding the clipping that shows me wrong about this. But I don't think a lot of janitors are probably walking out of Netflix over this. That this is something that is a relatively this is something that I think has a much narrower sort of potential, and I think that's a problem, because we really desperately need to rebuild the labor movement, and I think it's good to have that be based as much as at all possible on the things that are going to be the most unifying demands, which is not to say that if your boss says something transphobic, that like the union shouldn't take an interest in that. Of course it should. But I think as a matter of emphasis, I think what's going to actually get large numbers of workers on board versus what gets the media really excited are often just living in completely different universes.
Yeah, I think what I add, which is just really interesting for me, is that I actually took a labor program at CUNY to get into this line of work, and I remember one of our professors, who was a longtime labor organizer, said like, "So, what do you guys think? Should unions be more stronger on bread and only, or should they only focus on bread and butter issues, right? Like more pay, no tiers, right? Overtime, all that, or should they take up social issues?" And those of us that were, most of us were really progressive in the class, were all like, "No, of course they should take up social issues. Are you crazy?" And
Right.
I think that's kind of an instinctual, in the sense
Right.
that. And so, but on the other hand, I'm very sympathetic to what you're saying. I just think that there's no easy answer, right, on exactly where.
Yeah, I mean,
where
it's
to
not
draw
going
the
to
line.
be. Yeah, it's because it's not going to be a super clear cut distinction that it's that like, because of course, like hostile work environment kind of stuff is absolutely right. What a union should take an interest in. But on the other hand, and this is where it gets genuinely sticky, if you know anything about how any of these controversies play out in the year of our Lord 2021, you'll also know that like you get these bizarre claims that people will make that like things that have absolutely nothing to do with anything going on in the workplace, make them feel very unsafe and, stuff like that, that are definitely often used to sort of conflate those two things, like the person at Vox, who last year who said, last year who said that, that she felt like unsafe at work because Matthew Iglesias signed the open letter to Harper's about cancel culture and free speech. It's like, okay, I'm sorry, no, that didn't actually make you feel unsafe. I officially do not believe that, but like if Matt Iglesias, who by the way, somebody I do not like whatsoever. I mean, like he has I think he actually like, yeah, the people were getting mad at an article that I wrote in Jacobin. He completely piled on to that, like he's not somebody I'm a fan of, but like, yeah, him signing an open letter, no, that didn't. If on the other hand, he was going around like walking around the offices at Vox, like sexually harassing people or, making racist comments to employees, then like, yeah, I mean, I do think that those are very much issues of that, it's not at all a waste of time that, definitely the union should be interested in that.
Yeah, and of course, like just like you said, a lot of these issues do cross over into the workplace, right? Like if you're trans, for example, ironically, a lot of I'm not saying that there's not a hostile work environment in these more white collar jobs for people in disadvantaged or minority groups. But if let's say you're in a customer service job where you're dealing with the general public, these dealing with racism, transphobia, sexism, it's you need the union even more, right, for those issues, yeah, and those kinds of jobs. So there is an overlap. I think to just to end, just one more interesting wrinkle is Dave Chappelle, after Dave Chappelle controversy, I mean, in a way, honestly, I'm just happy to see unfair labor charge in an article that's popular, right? Yeah. So after one of the workers who I believe helped organize the walkout, they were fired, right? And the Netflix said supposedly that they were fired because they leaked, internal data or something like that, right? So they're getting hit with an unfair labor charge, which means that, and what I'm curious is because my union will help file ULPs on behalf of other people. I'm curious if they're working with a major union now, right, to try to organize within Netflix, which would be great. But what that means, if people don't know, is that Netflix might have done something illegally retaliatory by firing them under the pretense that it's about this data leaking when really it's about speaking out, right? So as good leftists and good unionists, that no matter how we feel about the walkout, we obviously support. And I would because I've seen some comments of a lot of people online are like, what's the big deal? They leaked info, and it was and it's like, I understand, but if you've never actually seen what the pretenses that a company will take to fire somebody, it's like, it could be true that they violated the company handbook, but is it such a coincidence that they were also speaking out against the company at the same time? I would be very reluctant to take the company's word as gospel, So
you certainly shouldn't take their word for it or whatever. Even if they did leak some stuff, or even if they did, like, I know that one of the people who's fired, they was supposedly like they'd. I think it was. I mean, I think the thing that had been reported, which wasn't actually true, at least directly, right? As you say, they're all like, what the official pretext is and what somebody's actually fired for, obviously, are not always going to be the same thing. But like, that the thing that did turn out to be true is people were fired for social media posts, but like then they said, oh, they were actually fired in at least a couple cases, I think, for like trying to like crash some like management meeting that they weren't like, eligible to be at, as a protest. And it's like, okay, sure. Let's assume that both of those things are true. I think a good union might still be able to save those people's jobs, and that's certainly the outcome that I'd be rooting for, right? I mean, I want to make it harder to fire people, and then it's like, I don't know, is this the first offense? I mean, is this really like you're going to go from 0 to you're fired? I think, whatever we think about the walkout itself or whatever the demands might or might not have been, like I said, it's a little unclear. Certainly solidarity to anybody who's facing termination by Netflix to try to get that reversed.
Yeah, I think to wrap up, I mean, it's interesting whether or not we like the culture war. It's definitely here, right? And pop culture is just such a huge part of our lives that maybe as socialists and as labor activists, it's more about taking the opportunity that different issues or cultural issues might bring up to try to take that opportunity to bring a higher labor consciousness to larger groups of people, right? So with this issue of a worker being fired, you might, if a union's working with those Netflix workers, they might be saying, hey, you may not agree with the walkout, right? But you just saw a worker fired for speaking out, right? This company has too much control over your life. Or with Squid Game, it's cool to see the Korean Union Federation using that to inspire worker action. And like even on the vaccine mandates, which we don't have time to get into, but workers might want to leave a company because of a mandate, which we know how I feel about that. But the larger argument is like, I know how you feel because this company has too much control over your life in this way, right? And there's all these other ways too, right? So hopefully these kinds of things can open up a juncture that can open up an opportunity for leftists and labor activists.
Absolutely. I see HG says in the chat, not all unionized people are culturally super progressive. Stuff takes time to seep in, which is exactly right. But this is actually, like, I think, the takeaway, if you look at a lot of labor history on this, is actually that this is one of the best ways to change that, right? Like the fact, at least according to the segment that I watched on the strike, I think at Breaking Point's, like 40% of the John Deere workers voted for Trump, and it's like, that's great, right? Because the more anybody in that demographic can see that, like, oh, what is actually going to defend my standard of living, what are the battle lines that I care about, and the more those battle lines are workers versus bosses, not like people who watch Fox versus people who watch MSNBC, the happier that I am. And honestly, I think long term it's the best bet for doing something about the culturally unprogressive attitudes that that I think there's a lot of evidence historically that working together with other kinds of people in the course of fighting for shared material interests is actually one of the best ways of getting people past different kinds of prejudices. It's not infallible, right? But I mean, I think it's probably going to do a lot more good than, whatever, like Robin DiAngelo vision quests about whiteness or any of that stuff. All right. Let's switch gears. We want to watch a little bit of Jason Brennan, who is a libertarian philosopher. And in the lecture that we're about to watch, a little bit of the lecture, he is going to talk about, one of my favorite 20th century philosophers, this dude, G.A. Cohen, who is this really important Marxist analytic philosopher. And it's going to sort of lead into, his argument about Cohen, and we're going to kind of stop just before that. But let's watch that first part.
In a capitalist society, the means of production are allowed to be privately owned, though even in a capitalist society, things are collectively owned. I mean, I have a retirement account with Georgetown, and it's a bunch of mutual funds, which I'm sharing ownership of a bunch of companies, I don't even know which ones, collectively with millions of other people. Right? So in a capitalist economy, individual decisions about economic matters are allowed. And in a socialist economy, these things are going to be decided somehow collectively. That's how economists tend to use the word. You can break it down more fine-grained, and actually a number of different institutes, such as the Fraser Institute, which is a think tank in Canada, hires a number of economists every year to score countries by how capitalist they are. And this is a map. The blue countries are the most capitalist. The red, red or like the least capitalist, yellow's in between, green's like kind of just below blue, right? So the most capitalist countries by the Fraser Institute rankings include the countries that the US Americans are inclined to call socialist, like Norway and Sweden and Finland and Denmark. The United States, Germany, Spain, Ireland, Switzerland, and so on. In fact, on this ranking, the US is usually about maybe around 18, right? In some years, Denmark actually ranks higher and more capitalist. So here's what I think might be going on with Michael Moore. He thinks that the word socialism has a kind of dirty meaning to people, at least older people, because we all kind of accept this sort of story from the 20th century. The story goes like this. In the 20th century, the world experimented with two fundamentally different modes of economic organization. In some countries, like Cambodia, Vietnam, USSR, China, Cuba, and so on, they experimented with having collective ownership of the means of production, with socialism. And those countries didn't do very well. They didn't do very well in particular for poor proletariat workers. The very people who were supposed to be liberated by socialism were in fact hurt by it. They had a stagnant standard of living and their lives did not go better. Other countries like South Korea, Canada, Australia, Switzerland, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, experimented with capitalist modes of production, and their people got to be a lot richer. And so as a result, maybe like we think, oh, we had this debate, there's nothing more to debate between socialism and capitalism, the debate is over. I mean, don't the facts speak for themselves? And what I'm going to say is, well, maybe not, but here's what some of the facts might be. In the year 1900, 95% of people alive lived in what the UN would consider extreme poverty, on less than what would now be $1 a day. Almost everyone everywhere throughout all of history was dirt poor and just on the verge of starvation. Today, by that same measure of extreme poverty, less than 10% of people are living in extreme poverty. In my lifetime, extreme poverty has dwindled down to almost nothing, and it continues to shrink. That's pretty cool. I'm pretty happy about that. It turns out that when you take the Fraser Institute's ranking of how capitalist countries are, the more capitalist a country is, the richer it tends to be on average. In fact, you can even see there's the trend line, and you might notice the more capitalist countries are significantly above the trend line. They tend to be richer than the non-capitalist countries. But if you're an egalitarian, if you care about the poor, you don't just care about averages. You want to know about how the worst off people do. But it also turns out that the worst off people in capitalist societies tend to make significantly more money than the average people in non-capitalist societies. So all the dollar amounts I give you through this entire talk, they're all going to be adjusted for purchasing price parity and the cost of living. So these are constant dollars across countries. You don't have to say like, well, it's cheaper to live in, Zaire than like Canada. I put that in the graph. It turns out that if you look at just people at the bottom 10th percentile of income in the most capitalist countries, they earn on average around $11,000 today, which isn't a lot. It's not that great. That's like the standard of living in like the poorest parts of Appalachia, but it's on par with the average standard of living across the entire world. Right? GDP per capita worldwide is around that. And this is also, by the way, that money, that's before they get any kind of welfare payments, any kind of government transfers, anything like that. So in fact, the gap between the so-called poor in the most capitalist countries and the poor in non-capitalist countries is even wider than this graph indicates. It's better to be, if you're living at what we consider the poverty line in the United States today, as a single adult, you're roughly in the top 15% of income worldwide. And again, I'm adjusting for the cost of living and adjusting for purchasing price parity. Some people worry that, well, maybe it makes people richer, but it makes them more unequal. The interesting thing is, like, it doesn't really matter where you look. You get roughly the same level of wealth, like as a percent in all these countries. In the most capitalist countries and least capitalist countries, the worst off people own only about 2.5% of the wealth. But that said, there's actually a negative correlation between how capitalist a country is and how unequal it is. Right? So historically, what you find is as countries become more capitalist, they start to become more equal. And then when they hit about $15,000 to $16,000 GDP per person, they start to become more equal, even before there's any kind of government transfers. So the relationship between, the actual empirical relationship between capitalism and inequality is kind of complicated. It's not just simply it causes it or doesn't cause it. It's sort of more of a curve. The curve's called the Kuznets curve, actually. Well, what about like looking at the poor? What do they own? They have a lot of stuff. So this is from the US Census Bureau. And actually, I took this one from 2005. If you update it, the numbers are a little bit higher. But you find that like the people at the bottom 10th percentile of income in the US, the people at the poverty line in the US, own about 43% of them own their own home. 74% of them own a car. But got almost a third own 2 cars or more. Most of them have air conditioning. They all have a refrigerator. Most have a clothes dryer. Many have a dishwasher. A lot have color televisions and so on. And, I'm not saying that like filthy lucre makes your life better, like perfect. And that's like the point of life, is to acquire as much stuff as possible. I mean, it is to acquire as many guitars as possible. But other than that, it doesn't really matter. But nevertheless, if you look at the kind of stuff that the poor in the United States own today, it's on par with what was considered middle class in 1970. If you look at ownership rates of these goods in the year 1970, it's actually worse than it is for the poor in the US today. So some progress has been made. This isn't just buying people filthy lucre, it's also buying them life. It turns out that in the most capitalist countries, people have a longer life expectancy than in least capitalist countries. And if you look at things like, as countries over the last 20 years move up in the Fraser rankings, you also find that life expectancy goes up. When they move down, life expectancy goes down. And the reason for that has to do with, there's a pretty strong relationship between GDP per capita and life expectancy, in particular when it comes to child survival rates. In very poor countries, children still die at a young age, and that brings down life expectancy dramatically. And in richer countries, they don't. So there's other numbers here. We could look at things like the poverty rates in certain countries. And you find, again, like in the most capitalist countries, extreme and moderate poverty are much lower than in the least capitalist countries. And things like scoring civil and political liberties, they tend to be more protected in the most capitalist countries than in the least capitalist countries. It also turns out, this is a work from Betsy Stevenson and Justin Wolfers, that the richer people are, the happier they are, though not that much. Money buys a little bit of happiness, not a much, but a little bit. So is there really anything to be said in favor of capitalism, socialism? Didn't we just have this debate in the 20th century? Don't the facts just speak for themselves? Isn't just over? Well, not really, because I think a very common reaction to these kinds of data is that, sure, maybe it works out, but nevertheless, there's still something morally good about socialism. There's still something morally superior about it.
All right. So at this point, he goes into his main subject, which is his critique of that book behind me, Why Not Socialism? And we will talk about the kind of dynamic between Cohen and Brennan on that in just a moment. But first, I want to talk about all of those figures that he just went through and just put so much weight on. That this is really what proves that, as a matter of fact, capitalism works out better than socialism. And at the beginning, he kind of did this thing where he defined socialism as collective control of the means of production, which makes some sense. He he'd made this move where he was like, oh, well, technically, if, you know, a bunch of people own stocks in same company, then they collectively own it. I was a little unclear where he was going with that, but I think he was clear that that's not what anybody means when they talk about collective ownership, right? As opposed to private ownership. If you sell a little piece of a company to, you know, 10,000 people, each get a little piece, then clearly it's private, right? You know, you can buy and sell pieces of it. But this is an important point for where we're going, that, you know, that he does do that, like relatively clear sounding definition of socialism, but then he uses these phrases like more capitalist and more socialist throughout. So what does that mean? Well, should depend a little bit on what you mean by socialism, certainly. So a lot of socialists, you know, myself included, you know, sort of see the main point as being about workers' control of the means of production. And if that's what we mean, then I don't know how we're measuring that, you know, because there's never been a society where a significant percentage of the economy was under the democratic control of the people in those workplaces. So, you know, that seems hard to measure, but there are a couple other things that you might mean by, you know, more capitalist or more socialist that wouldn't be totally counterintuitive and would at least track some of what's typically going on in socialism versus capitalism debates. So one thing, you know, like I said, a lot of socialists say, no, what we're really talking about is worker control. But other socialists say, well, state ownership is good enough, right, to count, right? This is an old debate, you know, within the socialist movement. So there's one position that, like, people like Michael Harrington will say, well, it could be if it's a democratic state, so that sort of ordinary working people are exercising control of it through the state. But if it's not a democratic state, then it's not. Other people, of course, you know, have had very different views and, you know, supported things like the Soviet model of, you know, what was called socialism there. And at least if you mean state ownership, then again, I understand what you're talking about, how you could measure it. You could say, okay, there's societies like the United States where only a very small percentage of the economy is under state ownership. There are economies like the Soviet Union and, you know, up through the end of the 80s where practically everything was state owned. And then there are in-between cases like Norway, where even now, like, almost a third of the public works for the public sector. And, you know, the state at least owns pieces of a lot of private companies. So if that's what you mean, then I would understand what you meant by more capitalist, more socialist. Hold that thought. So yesterday in Jacobin, an article that I wrote about this went up, that this Brennan lecture was part of what brought this to my attention. There's also a paper that I read for other reasons that was another part of what brought it to my attention. And in both cases, you have these libertarians making a huge deal about these Fraser Institute numbers, right? Remember, they said, he said in the lecture, this is a think tank in Canada that does these economic freedom rankings. You know, ranks different countries by economic freedom and then finds out that more economic freedom is correlated with all the good things and less economic freedom is correlated with all the bad things. And if you want people to have higher standards of living and be more educated and live longer, and, you know, that even the poorest people in society, you know, to improve over time and all of this stuff, then you want, you know, more capitalists, because the more capitalist a society gets, the more of all these good things it has. That's the story that Brennan is telling. That's the story that other libertarians have told using this same source, the Fraser Institute's. It's called the Economic Freedom of the World Report. And I think they used to do it less often, like maybe once every 5 years. Now they're putting it out once a year. And this made me really curious. Okay, what do they mean? What's the methodology? And started to poke into this. And guys, this is spectacularly bullshitty. So the way this works, they rank different countries' level of economic freedom using 5 metrics that are used to, like, award or subtract points to different countries, which should already be a little suspicious because, like, honestly, if you want to make some, like, really clear, rigorous claim, like, you know, shouldn't you just kind of like look at one and like see what correlations you could find based on that? But whatever, that's fine. So there are 5 metrics, and some of them sound like they might have something to do with traditional capitalism, socialism debates, like size of government is one, and regulation, is one. There's one category called legal system and property rights, and you hear that, it's like, I understand what property rights are doing there, but what's this legal system and property rights thing? That seems like a weird way to mash together a category. Hold that thought. There's also one called sound money. You think, wait a second, what are we talking about here? And how is it supposed to relate to debates about socialism and capitalism, and whether countries are better off being more free market or more social democratic, like that? And you look into this, and this is actually not unusual. Like there's also a Wall Street Journal / Heritage Foundation economic freedom ranking that pulls the same trick. What they're talking about when they talk about sound money is how much inflation there is, and the justification that they use, if you read the fine print in this report where they like lay out all the categories, is, well, if there's lots of inflation, that robs people of their ability to reap the benefits of their property ownership. So you don't really have meaningful property rights if there's lots of inflation. Now, notice that the order of explanation here is exactly backwards from what you would usually get in right-wing anti-socialist arguments. That usually right-wingers will say, oh, do you know about Venezuela? As an anti-socialist thing, and they'll be saying, oh, all this inflation that happened in Venezuela is proof that socialist policies lead to bad outcomes. But here they're doing the opposite. They're not saying there's something socialist about it, and that's correlated with lots of inflation, therefore socialism is bad. They're just preemptively defining inflation as making societies less capitalist. That's a fun trick. They also, in the legal system and property rights category, that's broken down into 5 subcategories, one of which, I shit you not, is military interference in the legal or political system. So there's also judicial independence and integrity of the legal system. So just to take a step back, and like everything that you just saw Jason Brennan say, there are a couple of places where he mentions other sources, but overwhelmingly the main source he was played up in that clip that we just watched was the Fraser Institute's economic freedom rankings. But what the hell are these supposed to rank that has anything to do with capitalism versus socialism? Because if you're telling me that societies that have lots of inflation, lots of judicial corruption, and frequent military coups have worse outcomes than societies that are more stable and don't have those things, then yeah, I believe you. But I don't know what any of that is supposed to have to do with anything that's an issue in debates about whether we're better off, having, more capitalist societies or less capitalist societies, as any critic of, like what any critic of capitalism would be like that, right? Critics of capitalism don't say capitalism is bad because there's not enough inflation and there's not enough judicial corruption and there aren't enough military coups, right? If you could show that those things are reduced by otherwise being capitalist, that might be relevant to the debate. But here you're just working backwards, and you could say, okay, well, here are things that are like precious to, like libertarian ideals or whatever, and having those things means you've lived up to those less. Okay, fair enough. But hey, free speech has been really important to lots of socialists historically. We were just talking about Woodrow Wilson putting Debs in jail. We could talk about the free speech movement at Berkeley that helped to kick off the New Left, the struggle against McCarthyism. So lots of leftists have had, free speech has been a really important ideal to us. But if we did a ranking of how socialist different societies were, and because that's an important ideal to us, we said that societies are less socialist if they have less free speech, and therefore we awarded the Soviet Union a lower socialism quotient than the United States and said, oh, see, more socialism is correlated with more free speech. Well, that doesn't prove anything. And this is essentially what they're doing. And if you think I'm exaggerating, one of the things I point out in this article, Jacobin, is literally, like, if you go the Fraser Institute on their website, they've got this little interactive map where you can quickly look up different countries and see where they go in the economic freedom ranking. You can compare different countries. Norway and Sweden are both at 37th place overall in the world for economic freedom. Haiti is 118th place. So according to the Fraser Institute, and remember, the way that people like Jason Brennan use the Fraser Institute, they'll say, because he was freely throwing around language about, countries becoming more capitalist or less socialist. That means that Haiti is less capitalist or more socialist than Norway or Denmark. Guys, remind me, which of these places has a bigger welfare state? Which has friendlier laws to labor unions? Which has a bigger public sector? I mean, anything that would actually be intuitively relevant to what people are arguing about when they have capitalism versus socialism debates. Obviously, Haiti is way more capitalist, than Norway or Sweden, if we're going to use that language and not just say, well, you're either capitalist or you're not, and if you have private ownership of the means of production rather than workers control, you're capitalist or whatever. But like, if you are going to talk in that more or less capitalist way, like, which of these places have more social democratic policies that would benefit, working class people? I mean, it's not a serious question. So that's the first thing, just that the way that people like Brennan are using this Fraser data is just bizarre. I mean, it's just like, it takes like 5 minutes of poking around their report on their website and how they explain their findings to show that they're just completely loading the dice for their preferred outcome.
Yeah, I mean, how much do you think is intentional? Do you think is it like, could we just do the same thing and make some phony metrics and have everyone buy into socialism, or do you think it's just these like little biases that kind of accumulate over time?
Yeah, I mean, look, the reason that people, like so many people, nod along to that, well, I mean, one, that that people they might employ are economists, and you respect them as experts, but also that it ties into a certain narrative that, as Brennan says in the clip, is a very, very well-established narrative, right? So it doesn't sound that counterintuitive to a lot of people when you say it. Whereas if you did the opposite, right? You had the you had the Burgis Institute, socialism rankings, and so, do you know that actually, you say that you say that the United States is less socialist than North Korea, but actually the Burgess socialism rankings show it's the other way around. People would laugh at that, as they should. But yeah, this way around, it ties into a pre-existing narrative. Okay, so that's the setup. Yeah, I think Singapore also, if you look at like the degree of public housing, for example, in Singapore, like there's some, that's also pretty dubious, ranking. But want to just really quickly do what he goes on to talk about over the course of the rest of that lecture after the clip we watched. Because he's, in that first part that we watched, he's using these Fraser Institute numbers to try to establish that, as a matter of fact, in the real world, capitalism works out way better than any sort of alternative, even a more social democratic, more regulated, more welfare state version of capitalism. Which, as we've just established, is nonsense on stilts. There's obviously plenty of evidence from the history of the 20th century that would ground intellectually honest criticisms of at least some kinds of socialism, but this ain't it. But then he goes on to make his, start talking about his much more interesting case, which is his case against Cohen. Because what Cohen is doing in this book, Why Not Socialism, is not sort of saying, well, empirically, we figured out how to do socialism right and it has good results. What Cohen is doing is saying, hey, here are some reasons to think that it would be more just if we could organize a, efficient, prosperous socialist economy, then we should want to do that. So this is a goal that we should try to strive for, even if it's kind of an open empirical question. how far we can get in that direction, and even if there's some design problems and whatever. That's the case that Cohen is making in this book. So I just want to start out with showing people how the book starts. He starts chapter 1. It's called The Camping Trip. And this is, he says, you and I and a whole bunch of other people go on a camping trip. There's no hierarchy among us. Our common aim is that each of us should have a good time, doing as far as possible the things that he or she likes best. Some of those things we do together, others we do separately. We have facilities with which to carry out our enterprise. We have, for example, pots and pans, oil, coffee, fishing rods, canoes, a soccer ball, decks of cards, and so forth. And as is usual on camping trips, we avail ourselves of these facilities collectively. Even if they are privately owned things, they are under collective control of the trip. And we have shared understandings about who is going to use them when and under what circumstances and why. Somebody fishes, somebody else prepares the food, and another person cooks it. People who hate cooking but enjoy washing up, they do all the washing up, and so on. There are plenty of differences, but our mutual understandings, the spirit of the enterprise, ensure that there are no inequalities to which anyone could mount a principled objection. It is commonly true on camping trips, and for that matter in other non-massive contexts, that people operate within a common concern that, so far as possible, everyone have a roughly similar opportunity to flourish and also relax, on condition that she contributes appropriate to her capacity to the flourishing and relaxing of others. In these contexts, most people, even most anti-egalitarians, accept, indeed take for granted norms of equality and reciprocity. God, I cannot talk today. I'm going to blame it on the side effects. So deeply do most people take these norms for granted that no one on such trips questions them. To question them would contradict the spirit of the trip. Important thing, by the way, to note for when we're not going to read it today, right? But for when you look at Brennan's response, he's not describing some crazy hypothetical. This is just how camping trips normally work in the real world. All right, you can imagine a camping trip where everybody, this is the fun part, asserts her rights over the pieces of equipment and the talents that she brings. And when bargaining proceeds with respect to who is going to pay what to whom to be allowed, for example, to use a knife to peel the potatoes, how much he's going to charge others for the now peeled potatoes that he bought in an unpeeled condition from another camper, and so on. You can base a camping trip on the principles of market exchange and strictly private ownership of the required facilities. Now, most people would hate that. Most people would be more drawn to the first kind of camping trip than the second, primarily on grounds of fellowship, but also, be it noted, on grounds of efficiency. I have in mind the inordinate transaction costs that would attend a market-style camping trip. Too much time would be spent bargaining and looking over one another's shoulder for more lucrative possibilities. And this means that most people are drawn to the socialist ideal, at least in certain restricted settings. To reinforce this point, here are some conjectures about how most people would react in various imaginable camping scenarios. A, Harry loves fishing, and Harry is very good at fishing. Consequently, he catches and provides more fish than others do. Harry says, it is unfair how we're running things. I would have better fish. I should have better fish when we dine. I should have only perch, not the mix of perch and catfish that we've all been having. But his fellow campers say, oh, for heaven's sake, Harry, don't be such a schmuck. You sweat and strain no more than the rest of us do, so you're very good at fishing. I don't begrudge you that special endowment, which is quite properly a source of satisfaction to you. But why should we reward your good fortune? Following a second example, following a 3-hour time off for personal exploration period, an excited Sylvia returns to the campground and announced, I've stumbled on a huge apple tree full of perfect apples. Great, others explain. Now we can all have applesauce and apple pie and apple strudel. Provided, of course, so Sylvia explains, that you reduce my labor burden and or furnish me with more room in the tent and or more bacon at breakfast. Her claim to a kind of ownership of the tree revolts the others. Third example. The trippers are walking along a bridle path in which they discover a cache of nuts that some squirrel has abandoned. Only Leslie, who has been endowed from birth with many knacks and talents, knows how to crack them, but she wants to charge money for sharing that information. Campers see no important difference between her demands and Sylvia's. Fourth example is my favorite. Morgan recognizes the campsite. Hey, this is where my father camped 30 years ago. This is where he dug a special little pond on the other side of the hill and stocked it with specially good fish. Dad knew I might not come camping here someday, and he did all that so I could eat better when I'm here. Great. Now I can have better food than you guys have. All right. We'll stop it there. You get the idea. The point is that what he's describing, and I think importantly to understand the structure of his argument here, he's not describing some hypothetical camping trip that morally perfect people would take under crazy circumstances. He's just describing a normal camping trip that normal people would take. And in fact, his point is that we could introduce market mechanisms here. We could have, for example, property claims based on inheritance, that, since you inherited this, you get to charge everybody more money for it. But in those small group contexts, we would find that intolerable, right? Nobody would ever go on a camping trip with that guy again. And Cohen thinks that this shows us something about how certain kinds of socialist ideals intuitively appeal to us. Now, Cohen is very frank about front-loading all the problems. He says, just because these are intuitively appealing ideals, right, that in the context of the camping trip, if you did the things that are just normal, everyday examples of capitalism, nobody would tolerate it, then that doesn't necessarily mean we know how to organize an entire society like that. Maybe there's some problem given human nature that this could work in small groups. We have a much harder time making it work in large groups. Maybe there's no problem with human nature, but maybe there's a problem with market signals that without sort of traditional market mechanisms, you just can't have an efficient economy. So, even if everybody's loving each other properly, you just couldn't make it work. And he's very open about all the problems. And he doesn't necessarily claim to have answers, but what he's trying to do in the book is sort of to draw out principles that he takes from this example and how he then thinks that we could translate these into principles about how we should, insofar as we could figure out how to organize society in a way that's more like that than it is like the hypothetical capitalist camping trip. So Jason Brennan, who we were watching earlier, wrote a book called Why Not Capitalism? Right? Cohen's is Why Not Socialism? Brennan's is Why Not Capitalism? And it's written in exactly the same format. Both of these, if you're watching this on YouTube, you saw the pages earlier. These are, each of these are 100 pages long, and especially the Cohen one, it's not that much on each page. These are very, very short, very readable books, and they're both written in a way that doesn't assume a lot of familiarity with political philosophy, but I think there are surprisingly deep waters here if you really start to get into all the arguments and counter arguments and possible objections you could make to what Cohen is saying, and possible objections to the way that Brennan is trying to turn it around in his book and show that he actually thinks that that there are these capitalist ideals that are appealing in the way that Cohen thinks the socialist ones are. And because of that combination, that neither of the books, assumes much familiarity with political philosophy, but it's also got tons of arguments in both of them that are things that, even if you do have a lot of background in there, that, there's a lot to chew on there that is interesting. I thought this would be a really fun thing to do a class based on. So my friend Heidi Matthews pointed me to this platform Speakeasy. So I'm going to try that out in December. So this is the class. You can see there if you're watching on YouTube. It says G.A. Cohen versus Jason Brennan. Why not socialism/capitalism? A 3-week webinar. So this could be the first 3 Sundays of December, where we're going to read the Cohen book and read the Brennan book. They're both very short books. And kind of do a deep dive in the arguments in both of them and different objections you can make to both of them and what ultimately my critique of Brennan is. So that should be a lot of fun. Again, that's the first 3 Sundays of December. The URL where you can sign up for that class is in the episode description. But I'm also, I see Antonio says, does he think socialism is when you draw only one rose? Brennan actually does clarify, I think it's in that lecture, that he was going to do a different color scheme. He was going to have roses that were like, was it like yellow and black or something, because that's like associated with libertarianism, but then it ended up looking horrible, so he just did the one red rose like the Cohen cover. But in any case, so that should be fun. There is another class that I'm going to be doing after that. We're going to be talking about in just a couple of minutes, which I'm really looking forward to in a different way. We're going to have returning champ Thaddeus Russell on to talk about that one. But meanwhile, want to show we have fallen out of the habit of doing this, but of showing these previews during the main episode. But every single Saturday there is a patron exclusive episode for people who join on the Patreon. Just as a reminder, you also get a patron exclusive post game every Monday night after this regular episode. You get those patron exclusive episodes on Saturdays. You get the monthly Sopranos recaps with Nando and Waz and Mike Racine and lots of other stuff. So that's patreon.com/Ben Burgis. But there is the patron episode that we did last Saturday. I talked about the movie Get Out as a Halloween episode of GTAA with our friends Jason Miles and Toure Reed. And there's a little bit of it. We got pretty off topic, but it's a fun clip. So let's read this real quick, and then let's bring on Thaddeus.
Well, you remember several years ago, AMC, I think, was doing Gone with the Wind marathons over Thanksgiving. And this was 2015, I want to say, and a friend of mine from college had mentioned a scene from Gone with the Wind, and it wasn't about race, it was about the gender politics. And I'd never watched Gone with the Wind because it wasn't really catering to my demographic. Right. But I watched it for the first time then, and it was struck by how much it was just a prettified version of The Birth of a Nation.
Was it you watched the colorized version?
I guess it would have been, yeah. I think that's what. But the most horrific part was that AMC was doing a marathon, right? So the movie is a gazillion hours long without commercial breaks. Yeah. Then with commercial breaks, it's like a gazillion hours, like 5 hours long or some shit. And then as soon as it finished, they'd run it again, and for at least 24 hours. And it was pretty stunning. And in 2015, that this AMC had thought this was a good idea.
I mean, people love Gone with the Wind because Hattie McDaniel.
Some people love Gone with the Wind, yeah. But since I had never seen it before, and I'd read a little bit about it, but it just didn't register until watching it. I was kind of not altogether clear on the controversy about the language in the film, and the original script had an overabundance of the N-word, and the NAACP pushed back against that, which I knew. But I didn't realize what they replaced the N-word with until I watched the film, and it was darkies. So every place in the film where it's darkies, because that's a lot better than the N-word. And for those of you at home, I'm being sarcastic, to be clear, when I say it's a lot better. I'm definitely being sarcastic. But every place where it's just darkies was originally N-word. And so it's fascinating, and was it film 1939 or something like that? Yeah. That darkies was the term that the NAACP would settle on, right? And that's not a criticism of the NAACP. Sure, right. It's a commentary on
the negotiation. But can you imagine the negotiations table for that?
Right?
Can you imagine the negotiation?
Yeah.
We want at least all 20 niggers in the movie. We can't have 20 niggers in the movie. We'll give you 2 niggers. We need 20 niggers. No, you can't have 20 niggers. Well, you can say nigger twice.
That sounds like it would have been like a skit from the season of Chappelle Show that was never made. That would have been one of them. They're doing the negotiations for Gone with the Wind.
How about we have 10 niggers, 20 darkies, and we'll let the maid have an emotion other than joy.
All right, and we're skipping all the stuff before that when they're making fun of me for how hopelessly white my range of movie and TV references are. But it is a fun episode. You should check it out. And with that, let's have Thaddeus Russell.
Hello.
Hey, Thaddeus, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I am very good. So, what we are talking about today is a class that was your idea originally, but I'm excited about it. This is sort of a buddy cop movie of a class about Karl Marx. So lay it out for us a little bit.
Well, I hear you're a Marxist.
Yes.
Yeah. And so we love teaching through debate. I've always loved that. When I was in college, I thought that's what it would be. I thought it would just be the smartest people arguing about stuff. You know, it'd be like the smartest people from this position on an issue versus the smartest person with this position on an issue, and they would just go head to head. And of course, I've never seen that in a college classroom. So I'm trying to recreate that in my little university at Renegade University. And the thing is, though, Ben, it's sort of false advertising because I like Marx a lot, actually.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of good things to say about Marx. I have some criticisms and I have some differences. So there will be debate. There will be some interesting, productive conflict, I think, of ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it would just be great to teach it with you, to co-teach it with you, because you and I, we've got a history, I think, of talking through, our differences publicly, and I think doing it well. So I really couldn't imagine teaching it with anyone else. I think you're a perfect partner for this.
Yeah. So the second you kind of laid it out to me in text, I mean, that sounded really, really fun to me. I mean, this is this is part of why, ended up studying analytic philosophy of all things. Cause like, even in the cases where like what you might be talking about in some cases, some classes that I took in grad school or whatever are like not necessarily intrinsically the most fascinating things in the world. Like, at least it was, at least people were like having interesting arguments about those things in class, which always appealed to me, because it's so much more interesting than a monologue. You end up learning so much more because
it's dialectical.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, look, you have criticisms of Marx. I have various small heresies where I think that there are things that Marx says that I actually don't think make sense or might have once made sense, but not so much in retrospect. But I think that there's a lot. It remains the case that I have. Well, actually, here, this is perfect. Jake, do we have the clip from the Charlie-Kirk debate where he asked about Marx?
What? And I want to get more into philosophy here. What's your view of Karl Marx?
My view of Karl Marx is pretty positive. I think that you can certainly find things like anybody who's writing in the mid-19th century that if there's nothing that you think is wrong about 150 years later, then like something has gone very wrong, right? There should be ways that you can say, no, this part no longer makes sense. You got to rethink that. I think you have to look at it a la carte, but I think that Karl Marx is a basically positive figure. I think that the theory of history is mostly right, and I also I see you smiling. Happy to get into it.
I'm happy to debate the Hegelian dialectic and the phenomenology of spirit.
Oh, okay.
No, not debate it. We can discuss it.
Not where I thought this was going, but that's cool. I
mean that's basically what you mean by the theory of history, right?
I don't think it is. I think there's a big difference there.
He was the head of the young Hegelians.
Well, he started out as a Hegelian, and then he rejected it in favor of what in some ways structurally is similar, but in some ways is the opposite because it's based on materialism. But here's what I do think when we talk about Marx, because I think that there's an interesting thing that happens here, that when people talk about Marx, they tend to say, well, any like dictator who existed in the 20th century, who claimed to be inspired by Marx, people who were born decades after he died, that discredits everything that Marx said. But then when we're talking about a philosopher like John Locke, who a lot of
love John Locke.
Yeah, right. And then, but then like John Locke, the man both philosophically justified and was personally involved in the slave trade, given his role, formulating the Constitution of South Carolina colony. The man philosophically justified the genocidal dispossession of Native Americans.
That's a misinterpretation.
Well, I think so, right? Because like his view is they don't really have property rights because they're not using the land properly, and so they haven't mixed their labor with it in the right way to establish a right to it. Whereas not only did Marx never not praise any dictatorships that were alive, when he was alive, his model for what he thought transition to socialism would look like was the Paris Commune, which was ultra-democratic, and the only head of state anywhere in the world who he liked.
So, all right. First of all, you're 100% right about John Locke. He absolutely offered a philosophical justification for the removal of natives from the land, in particular native North America. He was particularly interested in that. There's no question about it. And you're also right that Marx did not praise any dictators, any communist Marxist dictators, because there weren't any yet.
Right.
But you didn't really say much more about what you like about Marx, though.
Yeah, right. So I just got into, I think the theory of history is basically right, and he offered to argue about the Hegelian dialectic and the phenomenology of spirit, which is I've got to say is not an expression that I would have expected to hear.
No,
come out of Charlie Kirk's mouth.
Although I did expect him to get it completely wrong, which he did.
Yes, yeah, we gotta, that was odd, right?
It's very odd.
But. And especially because you'd think the own would be the other way around, right? That if anything, it would be like if somebody brought up Hegel, the thing that shows that Hegel is bad is that Hegel leads to Marx, not like the thing that shows that Marx is bad,
right?
is that Marx is a Hegelian, which has the added benefit of just being like straightforwardly not true, right? I mean that's
I know, like everyone agrees on that. Like
yeah, exactly. I mean, like you could say like
well.
I mean, uncontroversially untrue. Like yes. I mean, Marx starts out as a young Hegelian, but like, I don't know, Richard Dawkins starts out as an Anglican. Like that's not,
because we believe in uplifting the masses through popular education. We are offering this course to Charlie Kirk for free.
Yes, that I like that.
Don't you think,
Charlie? Yes, I think we should absolutely offer it to.
So it's a social necessity, is it not? I think.
Yeah, I think so. So I think had we not gone in that direction and we got a little bit more into what I like about Marx, we would have got into more of the things that you and I disagree about. So. I think the one that was already there in that clip is. Materialism, that I think,
right.
I think you're a pretty, I think you pretty proudly hold the position that ideas play a historical role that Marx doesn't think they do.
Yep.
For example.
Yep.
And another important distinction is that you like postmodernism, which is as we've discussed before, is very radical, like not only not identical to Marxism, which some people think it is, but like not compatible. I think actually we would both agree on that, that claim about the relationship between the ideas, even if we have different ideas about which one to pick if you have to pick. And then of course, there are all the debates about politics, about Marx's, implied normative commitments, what he thinks should happen. And, that's where we really get into the disagreements. But I think it's gonna be a really fun class. We've gone over the back and forth a little bit on the reading list, but it's trying as much as it is at all possible for 4 sessions to do a cross section of the political and economic and philosophical and historical writings, as much as that might be realistic for that. We could always offer another one of these later, which could be longer.
Yeah.
So what's the, like, give me kind of an elevator pitch about why this would be an interesting class for people to take.
Oh, so I think that for people who haven't read Marx in any serious way, it's going to give them a really solid introduction, because you and I have been teaching Marx for decades now at this point. I've been teaching him since the 90s. I don't know about you.
Yeah, not quite that long, but certainly
Yeah.
been, yeah.
And I think also kind of getting the basic information through a bit of a dialectical process, of there's going to be some debate, some discussion, some conflict there. I think it'll be as good a grounding as you can get in Marx for a beginner. And then for people, but the thing is, for people who know him well, I think it's going to be a blast, because not only are you and I going to be in there having interesting discussions and interesting differences, but the people who we bring to the class, right? You're going to bring your posse and I'm going to bring my posse, and they're going to be very different in a lot of really interesting ways. What's great about when you and I teach together is that there's not a lot of middle people from the middle. You're not going to find a lot of liberals and conservatives. You're going to find a lot of people who are like pretty far left and pretty far something else, not right, but like libertarian leftists.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, lots of people who are libertarians, lots of people who are socialists, maybe a few people who are kind of social democrats, a few people who are like, whatever you are, which is, which we've, discussed in the past, but probably can't be easily summarized in a few words.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, exactly.
Yeah. There's going to be a lot of major differences of opinion. Again, you don't get this in college classrures.
No, not nearly. Yeah, not nearly as much as you should. I mean, honestly, what I've gotten, having been in college classrooms in one form or another since I don't know, the 19th century sometime. Approximately.
Me too.
What I find, right, is certainly at a undergrad kind of level, is that sometimes you can teach some classes where people are really interested and they have opinions, and that's great.
Yes.
But realistically, it's like most of the jobs are sort of just at the kind of assembly line of like getting people through requirements, and honestly, even with things that are a little bit better, because you have just intrinsically that setup in a traditional university, you have so many people who have the number of people who have reasons for being in the class other than they're intensely interested in the subject is going to overwhelmingly outnumber the people who are in there because they really care about it, because like even if it's not an introductory class, well, I need such and such many classes to finish my major, or I thought this one might be soft on my GPA, or I like all of this stuff, and you have to spend all of this time talking to people about grades, which I hate and would like to abolish, because I just it's just the least interesting possible use of your time to to get into that. Whereas in these things, the previous class that I was teaching and you were kind of facilitating at Renegade University before, or the two that I've done now at the Michael Albert thing, School Social and Cultural Change, like these non-regular university classes, literally 100% of the people who are there.
Everybody.
Yes, everybody. No exceptions. Is there
every
they
single
actually care about this?
Every single student is a dream student, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
It's your favorite. Every student is your favorite student, meaning they are 100% motivated and into it and intellectual and passionate, and they can't get enough of it. Whereas, as you're saying, like in regular normie schools, you'll always get like one or two kids like that in every class, pretty much, something like that.
But,
and they're
it's
wonderful.
like one or two kids in like a 30-student class. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
No, totally. I mean, it's like I always drove me crazy. People, form these beliefs that like atheist philosophy professors, we're gonna like punish them for having religious beliefs or whatever. It's like, are you kidding? If somebody came into a class who was like a passionate theist and like actually like had like was gonna like write papers where they weren't just like trying to write something that they thought would get an okay grade, but like they were like really trying to make an argument for this, like I'd be overjoyed by that, right? It'd be like, that would be such a great relief from the boredom.
Of course.
Yeah, exactly. So I think
The discussion in this class, Ben, is going to be it's going to be amazing with a bunch of socialists and libertarians and you and me talking about Marx. I mean, this is going to be really good. I can't wait for this. I don't know what's going to happen, but it's going to be really interesting. I love the way you highlighted the differences. So just we're obviously not going to get into it now, but yes, you and I differ on Marx's theory of history, materialism generally, and I mean that's the big one. I guess also the politics, of course. You know, Marx's politics, which are less important in a sense in the texts, you know, but that's where we differ as well. But I really can't wait to get into the difference between, you know, sort of Hegelian idealism and Marxist materialism and their derivatives and all the meaning of that. Because I'm a historian, and this is obviously very important to me. And I've thought about this for a very long time. And then also, you know, sort of the base superstructure model, which I know is not exactly in Marx, but it's been talked about. We can talk about whether it is in Marx, first of all, and then whether or not it's useful. And I've been thinking about since the dawn of time in my life, you know, it seems like. So it's like one of the very first questions in graduate school, you know, what about the base superstructure model? What determines culture? Why do we have religion? Why do people think the way they do? Is it because of economics, or is it just these ideas floating through the air, like Hegel says? So I've been thinking about since the early 90s.
No, absolutely. Like I think, and I think like also, I mean, the stuff in the more philosophical, you know, parts, like thinking about, you know, what Marx is, you know, is saying, you know, about rights. What's the relationship between Marxism and liberalism? You know, huge interesting question there.
Right.
I think it should be a blast. Totally. So how do people? And we've got the link in the episode description, but for anybody who's just like listening to this in the other room, what's where do people go to sign up for this?
So the quickest, easiest way to do it is to go to renegadeuniversity.com/Burgis, and you'll see it right there. Course description will be there, and you can enroll right there. Just click on the button.
All right, awesome.
One more time, renegadeuniversity.com/Burgis. There you go.
All right, thanks, Thad.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so we are going to bring on Jennifer for the philosophy segment in just a minute. But right now, I want to do a quick preview for what we're going to be talking about next week. So the guest next Monday is going to be a very good friend of the show, Anna Kasparian, and we're going to have her on to talk about something that actually happened a couple days after I debated Charlie Kirk. The video was released a lot sooner. But yeah, I think it was literally like a day, 2 days, maybe 3 days later after I debated Kirk, Anna debated Ben Shapiro. And I was really, really happy with how that debate went, and which is one of the reasons I invited Anna to come on the show to kind of talk about it and go over some of it. There are a lot of reasons we'll talk about next week why I enjoyed that, and everybody should watch it. But let us just take a minute to watch a couple minutes of what went on in that debate.
Capitalist class. I don't think the capitalist class exists in opposition to the worker class. I don't think that my workers, the people who work for my company exist in opposition to me. I think that I really don't know many people who run businesses who are out to quote unquote exploit their labor and treat them like garbage. I don't think that is something that they wake up seeking to do. I think that in fact, what private business has done is drive competition for labor in ways that non-private industry has never done. Public companies are publicly owned companies, particularly nationalized industries, are not famous for treating their workers extraordinarily well. The notion that private companies treat their workers horrifically and that all labor is exploitative, except if you work for the government, which doesn't have any incentive to treat you well at all because you obviously can't do anything. It's the government, is I think wrong. I'm not opposed to unions so long as they're not kneecapping people or so long as they're not forcing anybody into a labor arrangement they don't wish to work under. But the notion that the labor arrangements ought to be general on behalf of people who have not voluntarily signed up for the labor arrangement seems to me skewed.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying, in my opinion, well, let me just note that as an employer, right, it's not that you have to be awful to your employees, but you have a fiduciary responsibility to your shareholders to return to provide a return on their investment. That's literally like it's baked into the system.
That's true.
And so as a result, I mean, what's the most expensive cost within a business?
It's always labor. Of
It's
course.
always labor.
We're also
So
in
when we
competition
talk
with other
about
people who pay.
exploitation, right? Exploitation always makes it seem like you're actively brutal and awful to your employees, which in some cases that does happen, but it doesn't even have to get that far. The whole point is to extract as much labor for the lowest possible price.
That can only
in
happen in a
order to
monopolistic situation.
increase profits and provide a return of investment to your shareholders. That's just the way the system works.
That's wrong. It's an economic fallacy that there is an impoverishment of workers that goes on under a laissez-faire capitalist system in which companies are actually competing for a commodity. Labor is a commodity. When you have companies that are competing for the same labor, the price of labor goes up. And this is one of the great fallacies of Marxist theory, is that there would be a general impoverishment of workers that would lead to the workers of the world rising. The fact is the living standards in industrial countries have been rising steadily, and that living standards in non-industrialized countries, non-capitalist countries have been crap for nearly all of human history.
Wages have been stagnant since the 1970s. So the argument that, these companies are competing for labor, it's a cute argument until you take a look at the actual data.
What happened to labor? What happened to
what
happened to labor between 1800 and 1970? And has the government grown smaller or larger since 1970?
Well, I mean, it's interesting that you bring up that time period, because the largest expansion of the middle class happened following the New Deal. And the New Deal redistributed wealth and,
by the way,
certainly gave a lot more power to the worker in the workplace.
Since the
That's been rolled back since.
Since the 1970s, the notion that the middle class has been destroyed is a fallacy. The middle class is largely becoming upper middle class.
Nearly 50% of Americans can't afford a $400 emergency. I think
pains me to interrupt this discussion because it is fascinating.
All right. So Anna will be on to talk about that debate next Monday. Should be fun. I love that clip for a variety of reasons that I hope are obvious. You can also watch me talk to Anna and Nando on the Jacobin Weekend show a little bit, where we went over some of that part of the debate. But we'll get into all of that next week. Meanwhile, it is time for philosophy. We have brought on certainly my favorite philosophy professor, Jennifer Burgis, to provide some expert commentary.
Well, I'm gonna try.
Yeah.
Want to show off my shirt first? Woo! Go Astros!
Yeah. So, I'll also out Jen for her expert commentary on a different subject just now, which is that as we were watching that clip, she's muttering to me, "God, that guy's voice is annoying," which I think is correct. Where's the lie? But in any case, I promise, are going to start doing philosophy segments that are not about Charlie Kirk very soon, probably next week. But there was just so much there that was wrong that he said. I was really happy, by the way, that Thaddeus earlier said that if Charlie wants to sign up for a class, we'll give him a 100% tuition discount. He can just take it for free, because he clearly has a lot to learn. But we do want to get in to
we're very intense
to one thing from that debate that is a philosophy thing that we have not talked about at all yet. Jake, do we have the clip of Charlie Kirk
Come on, Jake.
asking
Do you
me,
believe in absolute truth?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, I'm just interested.
I mean, do you? Let me make sure I understand what you're asking. Right?
Yes.
So, when you say absolute truth, do you just mean that whether things in general about any subject are true or false?
Yeah, I guess what I'm getting at, and I hate to use like the cliche
Sure.
word, is would you consider yourself a postmodernist? That truth is relative.
No, absolutely
Okay.
not.
So that's good. Do you think that postmodernism and that kind of movement is harmful or helpful to the American left?
I think it's harmful. I don't
That's
think.
interesting.
Elaborate
that.
I don't think we should believe in alternative facts any more than anybody else should. I think that what's
I agree with you.
true is I think that what's true generally speaking, it depends a little bit, what we're talking about. And I'm not saying, the only reason I'm saying
like
that
Newtonian physics, like force equals mass times acceleration,
sure.
right?
Well, yeah, I mean, technically, Newtonian physics is a good enough approximation for like mid-sized dry goods. The real stuff is like quantum physics and relativistic physics.
Of course, but you understand what I'm saying.
But I understand what you're saying, and I agree, right? Absolutely. I think that truth is objective. I think if you want to get into an argument about who in practice, who has political power, is actually denied that, more than others.
I don't think there'll actually be much fruit in that discussion. Then
we could get into that.
He said.
But if your question is whether truth is objective, then I think it is.
In the middle.
Yeah. So there we go.
There we are.
Yeah. So
I love how that's another one of those moments where he says something and you just like, for a minute, yeah.
Yeah. There's a moment from the very beginning of the debate that Jen has brought up to me a few times that she found funny, where I think he's just finished making his opening statement. And then it's my turn, and I think this is not me trying to be obnoxious. I mean, this was just
which makes it so much better.
I think I just start out with, okay.
That's such a great moment. I love it.
But yeah, so obviously this clip was a little funny because he wanted an example of objective truth, and his example was Newtonian physics, which is not actually.
Now, we are not scientists.
Sure,
we are philosophers.
But I took physics in high school.
I didn't.
Okay. But
they didn't offer physics in my high school, so there's that.
And I'm certainly not a physicist, but what people who are tell me, and I believe them, is that those Newtonian laws are not actually, strictly speaking, true. That's like sort of good enough for predicting the weather and all of that stuff, doing those word problems that if you had taken physics, you get this like sort of like the baseball is.
Is that where one train leaves Seattle and the other train leaves Chicago, and what time will they crash?
Yeah, that sort of thing, right?
Okay.
That's all those equations about forced acceleration or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's like good enough for most of those purposes, but it's not strictly speaking true, because if you're talking about really, really small things, subatomic particles, or really, really big, really, really fast things, it's not, it actually breaks down there. But
wait, so are we bashing Charlie on science or on philosophy?
All right, well, let's go back to the philosophy.
Or both? Or what,
I mean,
what are we doing
well,
here?
we're not bashing, we're educating him, but
right. I forgot.
I think I just found that a little bit funny, but that's not the point. At the point.
Why not both?
Yeah. So the point is about philosophy. So he seems to assume, I guess, that as a leftist, I'm less likely to believe in objective truth.
Is that right?
No.
Oh.
No, not whatsoever. Wow. Which, and that was kind of the point of my little dig about alternative facts, which is famously a phrase that was used by Donald Trump's press secretary, Kellyanne Conway. You have your facts, we have all our alternative facts. But that seems like a place where why not both doesn't apply. That if something is, one thing is true, that if you have then the alternate truth is not actually true. It's might be true in some hypothetical world, but it's not true in.
I mean, this is how you managed to get your PhD. Ben, I don't know if y'all know this, but Ben wrote his dissertation on A and not A, and how they both can't be true.
Yeah. So
this was groundbreaking work in the field of logic, and this is why Ben is where he is today.
Yeah. So what is being summarized not only there is that
there's going to be a movie. Ben's mom is going to be not A, because that's a role she picked. So that leaves me with A.
So what's been summarized here is that my dissertation was about logical paradoxes, and in particular, dialetheism, which is the view that you should solve logical paradoxes by saying that sometimes A and not A can both be true. And there's the sort of opposite view, which is called paracompleteness, which says that sometimes we should reject both the claim that something is true and the claim that it's not true. So
is this a why not both or why not either or neither? Why not neither?
Yeah. So dialetheism is why not both? Porque no dos dos.
Oh.
And paracompleteness is more like why not neither. Which I can't say this without having like nitpicky voices in my head being like, well, technically that's not exactly what they're saying, but let's just leave it there. I think that's good enough to explain the joke. So
Joke? What joke?
So Jen has been giving me shit about this ever since we got together about how about how ridiculous it is that I was essentially writing a dissertation about like the most mind-numbingly obvious thing ever, which is that statements and their negations can't both be true.
Yeah.
But in any case, Graham Priest, this says the Chad is an evil scientist trying to make his Frankenstein creature. Is actually my favorite line from Graham Priest's book. In contradiction is about Frankenstein, but I'll just let people look that one up on their own, as philosophy papers sometimes say, as an exercise for the reader. So
those are my favorite ones. Cut some of that material out.
I don't actually have to do the 20-line proof here. If you want to do it on your own, knock yourself out, but we can skip it, is basically what people are saying when they say, I'm going to leave this as an exercise for the reader. But yeah. So thinking about objective truth, the reason that the thing I said just before we started talking about Newtonian physics was,
yeah.
Okay. Well, first I said, is sure. I mean, some things are objectively true and some things are not. That's
some things are and some things are not. Wait, is it okay to reference Louis C.K. now, or is he still canceled?
I think.
Am I now going to be canceled?
Yeah. Well, I'll stand by you, man. But so there's this old Louis C.K. bit where he's talking about. Was it like his 3-year-old daughter or something, asking him why questions. He says, why? And he explains, and he says, okay, but why? And then he explains, okay, but why?
People wonder why I don't want to have kids.
And then at the end of it, he gets down to, because some things are and some things are not, which is funny because, I mean, it's obviously funny, but also it's meta funny because he's rediscovered the law of the excluded middle that for every statement, either the statement or its negation is true, to make the why conversation with his 3-year-old daughter be over. But I would say we're not going to book Louis on the show, but I think we should be able to admit that he had a lot of funny material.
Sure.
So after the shore, he was, he's still talking about it. He's like, are you a postmodernist? Definitely not. I had.
Oh, me either. Me either. Nobody asked me, so I'm gonna.
Are you a postmodernist?
No.
Okay, there we go. Somebody asked you. Actually, fun. When I was a senior in college, I think one of the last philosophy classes I ever took in undergrad was called Contemporary Philosophy. And we were reading all of this stuff I think the class started with Nietzsche and it went to a bunch of current continental philosophers, and it was being run as a seminar. So students would take turns, it would be their job that day to do a presentation on whatever the reading was.
That sounds terrible.
For that day. Well, what's even more terrible is that when it was my turn, the reading that I had to try to summarize was by Derrida. Who, Jacques Derrida, anybody who's watching who's not familiar, French, postmodernist thinker.
Oui.
And I read that thing, I read it, and I had no idea what he was trying to say. And so I just kind of made some shit up and said that that's what he was saying. And then it was like a really like jarring moment for me because I thought I was going to get called on it. That like, you know, one of the other students or at least the professor would be like, no, that's not what he said. And
He's saying whatever you want him to be saying.
And nobody did, right? Nobody called me on it. Just like, oh, this is like an Emperor's New Clothes thing. So yeah, I have, that's my, we had to make sure Thaddeus was gone before I insulted Derrida. But that is my early experience souring me on the idea that this is a sort of productive vein of inquiry. Yeah. So Baki in the chat says Ben now knows what it's like to be an English grad student. I guess that's, so I'm not saying it, he's saying it, you just make some shit up and then nobody calls you on it. But after that, like I was trying to figure out like what he was getting at. I was like, okay, I mean, maybe it depends a little bit on like what you're talking about, because there might be some things that you could say that there's some sense in which what's true about some subjects is relative, not objective. So like, if you're making value statements, I mean, philosophers will argue about whether moral value statements are objectively true, whether moral realism is true. But I've never heard of anybody who was like a politeness realist who said that like what counts is, that like some things are objectively polite, even if no culture has realized that they're objectively polite. It seems like everybody's a relativist about that one.
Okay. Yes. Yes.
So, I mean, that would just be a example off the top of my head where you could say that there are some things that are not objectively true, that if they're true, it's only true relative to like time, place, or culture in that, in that example. But
it seems like when people say, do you believe in, that doesn't mean do you believe everything is. Like, I believe in zebras. That doesn't mean I think everything is a zebra.
No?
No.
Okay. So I'm not a zebra?
No.
Okay. You're not a zebra?
No.
Okay. All right. We could do a really fun bit here where we just spend 2 hours asking whether different objects in the universe are zebras.
Oh man!
But we'll skip that. Yeah, I mean sometimes. So okay, so if what you mean by objective, do you believe in objective truth? Is do you believe that at least some things are objectively true? Then that strikes me as a really, really easy question. Yes.
Yes.
But
I said that already. Yes.
but I guess
good night, Antonio.
It could be the case that, I mean, there are people in my experience, mostly 19-year-olds, who will deny it, deny that if you ask them.
Yes, yes.
Like in an intro to philosophy class, they'll say, no, I don't think anything is objectively true.
Yes.
So
and then you throw a pencil at their head.
Is that what you do?
Yes.
Oh, I've got to say, this is very unlike your teaching technique every time I've ever been in one of your classes.
That is particularly annoying.
Yeah, it is very annoying. So I mean, what can you say to that? Like when they do trot that out?
Don't be an idiot.
Is that what you said?
No, what I say is, does anybody have anything to say to that? And let the class take care of it. I mean, there's only so much idiocy I can be expected to deal with.
Yeah, all right. So beyond calling them idiots or letting the class take care of it.
No, really though, that's one of those things where it's like, does anybody here want to respond to Bob?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, another way of responding to Bob is that if you like, okay, I mean, you could try to, like, you could go through examples, like do you how many fingers am I holding up, right?
Or did the pencil objectively hit you?
Yes.
I'm going to use that from now on once I throw the pencil at them.
Yeah, I know there's a medieval Arab philosopher whose name I do not recall right now. Starts with Ibn, that much I'm sure about.
Starts with what?
Ibn.
Oh, sure.
but who has a line where he's talking about the law of non-contradiction, right? The claim that it's never the case that a statement and its negation are both true.
So like A and not A.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And he says that those who deny this should be beaten and burned until such time as they admit that there's a difference between being beaten and not being beaten, and being burned and not being burned. So that's like an extreme extreme version of the pencil
Is
thing.
it that extreme though, really?
All right. Nice. Ibn Sina apparently also Avicenna. Anyway, I'm not 100% of the pronunciation.
No, I'm not either, so I'm not even gonna try.
Yes, you probably much more wisely than I.
Yes.
I did not try. But yeah. Yes, J. Hutch talks too much, says, quote, sure, it's the truth that I hit the student with a pencil, but it's not a capital T truth. So, yeah, which is oftentimes, I think, when like 19-year-olds will say this. And granted, I do think sometimes philosophy professors who run into this in intro classes, like, will sort of credulously conclude, oh my God, like the 19-year-old kids all believe that there's no such thing as objective truth.
I am hurt.
Well, because he doesn't want to be your student because he doesn't want you to throw a pencil at him.
Well, he's not an idiot. I wouldn't have to throw a pencil at him.
There we go. Yes, I agree, Janos. That it's like the rock kicking thing. Which, in other words, it's a funny line. It does not actually. It's not actually a good argument, against it, which is why I wrote that dissertation Jen thinks is so hilariously pointless. To try to do better than the beating and burning argument.
It was not pointless. You got a PhD, which is not at all pointless.
There you go. Yeah, the G. Moore thing about hands, for anybody who doesn't know.
Oh, that's my favorite.
What Joe was
That's
talking
my
about
favorite.
is it's an argument that that external objects exist, that it's not that like only your mind exists. There are also external objects. Here's how the argument goes. If you're just listening to this on a podcast, you'll have to look up this moment and watch it on YouTube. Here's G. Moore's argument that there are external objects. Yeah, there are. Here, I'll prove it. Here's one. Here's another one. There
Here's one in. Here's why not both?
Yes.
I'm sorry. I'm very tired right now. So
Yes.
I'm a little loopy.
Yeah. Was up late. Jen was up late watching the Astros.
Yeah. He's the only person in the bar wearing Astros gear.
Being in Atlanta.
Man, it was nice. It was so nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So sometimes philosophy professors will sort of draw this hysterical conclusion. Oh my God, relativism is just rampant out there. And it's like, oh, okay. I think there's a certain kind of 19-year-old who will sort of like try it out while they're in intro class. That doesn't really mean that
It's rampant in the occasional 19-year-old.
yes, it's rampant to the occasional 19-year-old. And I think I might even go further and say it's rampant to the occasional 19-year-old when they're in philosophy class.
Yeah.
And so they sort of have a,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
it's like, hey, maybe this is true. Let me try it out and see what I can, what I
Yeah.
can do here. And then they end up doing these silly things like, well, there's truth, and then there's truth. That's it's there's one that you just emphasize a whole lot. And then it gets. I think that for anybody who's earnest about that and not just like they think it sounds cool to say it in philosophy class, like a good follow-up question is that objectively true, that nothing is objectively true? So if I don't,
Oh, snap.
is it just, and if it's not objectively true, what is it relative to? If it's relative to individual opinion, then if I'm not a relativist, I could, I'm not doing anything, I'm not committing any sort of mistake when I continue to deny relativism. And, and I think maybe they might realize over the course of this conversation that they actually do think that some things are objectively true.
Some things are and some things are not.
But look, to be fair, even if his example is kind of a weird example, Charlie Kirk does apparently believe that some things are objectively true. So that's.
I mean, he did say he agreed with you.
Yeah, he did say he agrees. So
Yeah.
so he does. So that is one thing that Charlie
He's
got.
not a total maniac. Yeah.
That is one thing that Charlie got right. In that debate. Now, I had to, for the sake of my friend Matt McManus, who has written a bunch of stuff about, what he calls postmodern conservatism. In other words, stuff like the alternative facts thing, that, like this sort of weird sense that you sometimes get from, certain kind of right-wing politicians, that they actually do believe that, truth is relative or whatever, like Alexander Dugin, saying like, well, I mean, these like liberal values you're talking about, that's fine, but we have our own Russian values.
Alex,
that are,
that Alex.
Yes, as we refer to Alexander Dugin around in this household, Alex. We're just on short first name terms with him. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, he got that. He got that right. Although I do think that him sort of trying to pin this view on people who disagree with him politically is dubious, and also if he knows that Newtonian physics isn't true. Odd that's the example, but we don't need to beat that into the ground any more than we already have. So we could probably cut it there for tonight. So Jake and I are going to go to the post game for patrons.
I'm going to go take a shower and go to bed. That's what I'm going to do.
Yeah. Well, I am not going to be very far behind because, as I mentioned at the top of the episode, I timed the booster shot badly, and so I am not at 100% right now. But
I was like, why is he doing this on a Sunday? But he's an adult. He knows what he's doing. It's his business.
Well, apparently not.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. So I think in my head it was like, oh, all right, I'll get any side effects out of the way by now, which doesn't actually make sense, but there you go. So I'm not at 100% right now, but what we're going to do in the post game, we're going to watch some Dennis Prager, and I think I could be at 42% and still do Dennis Prager debunking. I don't think you need to be anywhere near 100% for that, and it should be fun. So we're going to do that right now. The link has already gone out to patrons, or if you didn't get the email, just go over to the Patreon. If you want to become a patron, that's patreon.com/Ben Burgis. You get many, many good things as we have been over, and also help keep the lights on. So please do consider doing that. And next week, again, we're going to have Anna Kasparian. We're going to go over the highlights of her debate with Ben Shapiro. Should be a really fun episode. The week after that, we have, not at the same time, separate segments, but we're going to have Emma Vigeland and Slavoj Žižek, and so on and so on.
And me.
and also Jennifer Burgis. Those three people in different parts of the show. Though it would be fun to have them all together, but that's not what we're going to do. So yeah, Anna next week, Emma, Slavoj, and Jen the week after that.
No, I'll be here next week too.
Yes, Anna and Jen next week. Emma, Slavoj, and Jen the week after that.
I am always here for y'all.
All right, nice. Take that to the bank. So we are going to leave it there.
Go Astros.
Left is best.